Leo Green was staring at the live broadcast of the alien ships in Earth's orbit when the call came in. He hadn't been expecting it. He wasn't even sure how he ended up on the short list. As a mid-level cultural attaché, Leo spent most of his time smoothing over trade misunderstandings or drafting agreements that no one ever read. He had never been in the room for anything truly monumental. And yet, here he was, standing in the heart of the United Nations Crisis Center, surrounded by some of the sharpest military and diplomatic minds on the planet. The room buzzed with nervous energy, officials speaking over one another as satellite feeds displayed the alien fleet, 3 sleek, wedge-shaped vessels glowing faintly with blue energy. Leo could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on him as his boss, Ambassador Daniels, gestured for him to step forward. "Leo," Daniels said, his voice tight with anxiety. "You're up." "Wait, me?" Leo froze mid-step. "Why not Carter? Or Patel? They've got." "Carter's in Geneva, Patel's on leave, and your name came up as the next most qualified. Plus, you've been briefed on xenoanthropological protocols." Daniels snapped, then lowered his voice. "This is a historic moment. Don't mess it up." Leo swallowed hard, smoothing his tie with clammy hands. "Right? No pressure." He stepped up to the comms array. The alien vessels had made no hostile moves since their arrival 3 hours ago, but their silence was unnerving. World leaders had agreed on one thing. An attempt at peaceful communication needed to happen before any defensive action was considered. The feed was live across the globe. Billions of humans were watching. No mistakes. This is Earth. This is a representative of Earth." Leo cringed at his own voice, but kept going. "I'm Dr. Leo Green, a diplomat from the United Nations. We'd like to open a dialogue with your people. Please, respond." Static filled the room. Leo glanced over his shoulder at Daniels, who gestured for him to continue. After a brief pause, Leo tried again. "This is Dr. Leo Green. If you can hear me, we mean no harm. We only wish to communicate." Seconds stretched into an eternity before a soft hum resonated through the speakers. A voice followed, smooth, measured, and distinctly unhuman. "Dr. Leo Green, we are the Velith. We have come to discuss matters of mutual interest." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room. Leo adjusted the earpiece connecting him to the mission control team. "Understood, Velith. May I ask what brings you to Earth?" There was another pause. Then the alien voice replied, "We wish to establish an alliance. Your world has many resources that would be mutually beneficial. Let us begin discussions." Before Leo could respond, a hand clapped him on the back. "Good start, Doc," said Major Aaron Lindholm, one of the military liaisons present. "But let's make sure they're not pulling our leg. Could be a distraction while they're scanning us." "Right?" Leo said, stepping aside as Lindholm moved closer to the console. Lindholm, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and a knack for asking the uncomfortable questions, leaned in. "What kind of alliance are we talking about? What's in it for you exactly?" The alien's voice came through again, calm but direct. "Our interests align. We offer advanced technologies and knowledge. In return, we seek rare materials your planet can provide. This exchange would ensure long-term stability and growth for both parties." "Sounds a little one-sided," Lindholm muttered. He turned to Leo. "What do you think?" "I think we need more details," Leo said, then returned to the mic. "Your offer is interesting, but we'll need more information. What kind of materials are you looking for? And what do you mean by long-term stability?" The alien hesitated before responding. "These matters can be discussed in person. Allow a delegation to visit your capital." The room fell silent. Daniels nodded for Leo to continue. "Understood," Leo said. "We'll need time to arrange that meeting. Can you provide assurances that no harm will come to our people during this exchange?" "We come in peace," the alien replied. "Harm is not our intent." Lindholm muttered under his breath, "Hope they mean that." Leo ignored the comment and focused on the conversation. "Thank you. We'll prepare for your visit. Stand by while we organize the details." The transmission ended, and the room erupted in urgent chatter. Military leaders discussed defense readiness, while diplomats debated how to proceed. Lindholm stayed close to Leo, a steadying presence amid the chaos. "They don't seem hostile," Leo said quietly. "But we can't let our guard down." "Agreed," Lindholm replied. "But let's also not throw the first punch. If this is legit, we could gain a lot." Daniels approached them, his expression a mix of relief and stress. "Good job, Green. Now let's figure out how to handle this delegation. Major Lindholm, stay with him. I want you both leading the effort to coordinate." Lindholm raised an eyebrow. "Both of us? Since when am I a diplomat?" "You're not," Daniels said. "But you know how to read people. And if things go sideways, I want you there." Leo glanced at Lindholm. The man gave a slight shrug. "Looks like we're a team now." "Great," Leo said. "No pressure at all." Together, they started planning Earth's next steps. Two men thrust into a moment that would change the future of humanity, and possibly the galaxy, forever. Leo and Lindholm were ushered into the secure conference room where the first face-to-face meeting with the Velith delegation would take place. The room was stark and minimalist, outfitted with just a circular table and a handful of chairs. Bright lights reflected off the polished floor, and a set of monitors displayed live feeds from the alien fleet hovering in low Earth orbit. "You think they'll actually show?" Lindholm asked, leaning back in his chair. The sturdy major seemed casual, but Leo could tell he was scanning the room, mentally noting every exit and vantage point. "They're cutting it close." "They gave us their word," Leo replied, though his voice lacked conviction. He ran a hand through his short, dark hair and glanced at the monitors. "And besides, if they wanted to do something drastic, they'd have done it already. All this posturing, it's just to make sure we're paying attention." Lindholm snorted. "Well, they've got my attention. Let's just hope they're not planning to pick apart our defenses while we're busy playing nice." Before Leo could respond, a soft chime echoed through the room. On cue, the double doors slid open, and the alien delegation entered. 3 Velith strode in, their forms draped in flowing, iridescent robes that shimmered in the artificial light. The ambassador, Kariza, led the group. Her tall, elegant frame was covered in deep purple skin, faintly illuminated by bioluminescent patterns that shifted in hues as she moved. Beside her stood 2 other Velith, one taller and bulkier than the ambassador, the other shorter and more slender. All 3 of them carried themselves with a measured, almost regal air. Leo rose from his seat, offering a tentative smile. "Welcome. Please have a seat." Kariza regarded him with a gaze that was both penetrating and oddly calm. "Thank you, Dr. Green," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. She lowered herself into the chair across from Leo, her companions following suit. "This meeting is important to us. We hope it will be to you as well." Lindholm remained standing, his hands resting casually at his sides, though his body language betrayed the readiness of someone prepared to act at a moment's notice. "We'll see about that," he said, his tone neutral but firm. "Before we start making any deals, we're going to need answers." "Major Lindholm, isn't it?" Kariza turned her glowing gaze toward him. "Your caution is noted, and it is not unwarranted. We do not expect trust to be given freely." "That's good," Lindholm said, lowering himself into the seat beside Leo. "Because you're not getting it freely. Let's cut to it. What do you want from us?" Kariza inclined her head slightly. "A partnership. As we explained earlier, our people have encountered challenges that require the resources your planet can provide. In return, we offer technology, knowledge, and companionship." Leo frowned. "Companionship? What does that mean exactly?" Kariza smiled, a surprisingly human expression. "Understanding, Dr. Green. Our species has much to learn from one another. By sharing our knowledge, our cultures, and yes, our companionship, we can create something greater than either of us alone." Lindholm raised an eyebrow. "And what if we decide we don't want this partnership?" Kariza's expression didn't falter. "Then we will respect your decision. But we hope that by showing our good intentions, you will see the value of our offer." Good intentions? Lindholm leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. How do we know this isn't just a front? That you're not scouting us for weaknesses? That would be a mistake, Kariza replied calmly. Our interest is in mutual benefit, not conflict. If we were seeking conquest, we would have acted long before now. Leo glanced at Lindholm, who gave a slight nod, conceding the point. Fine, Leo said, but you'll need to give us something concrete. Something that proves you're willing to invest in this partnership. Kariza looked to one of her companions, who produced a small, crystalline device from the folds of his robe. He placed it gently on the table and slid it toward Leo. What is it? Leo asked, not touching it. A repository of knowledge, Kariza said. It contains detailed schematics for improving your energy systems. A gift to show our sincerity. Lindholm studied the device warily. How do we know it's not a trap? Some kind of Trojan horse that'll infect our systems? You are free to analyze it before using it, Kariza said. We have no interest in sabotaging this relationship. The room fell silent. Leo reached out, his fingers hovering over the device. He glanced at Lindholm, who gave him a slight shrug that seemed to say, Your call. Taking a deep breath, Leo picked it up. It felt surprisingly light in his hand. We'll examine it. If it checks out, it's a step forward. Kariza smiled again. A small but genuine curve of her lips. That is all we ask, Dr. Green. A step forward. Lindholm leaned back in his chair, watching the Velith closely. One step at a time. But don't think we'll let our guard down. Kariza inclined her head. I would expect nothing less. As the meeting continued, the foundation of a partnership began to take shape. But Leo and Lindholm both knew this was just the beginning. Trust was not yet earned, and the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. Leo sat on the observation deck of the Velith ship, staring out at the vastness of space. It was a strange mix of awe and unease. The ship's transparent walls made it feel like he was floating among the stars, and yet he couldn't shake the sense that, at any moment, something might go horribly wrong. Not what you expected, huh? Lindholm's voice broke the silence. The Major leaned casually against the railing, arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the endless void. Leo shook his head, a wry smile playing on his lips. Not exactly. When I signed up for diplomatic service, I figured I'd spend my days arguing over trade deals. Not, at least the view's better than a boardroom. Lindholm glanced over his shoulder as Kariza entered the deck. Her glowing bioluminescent markings reflected faintly off the glass, casting soft purple patterns on the floor. Looks like we've got company. Kariza approached with that same calm, measured gait she always had. Dr. Green, Major Lindholm, she said with a small nod. I trust you're finding your accommodations adequate? Adequate is one word for it, Lindholm said. Though I'd still prefer solid ground under my feet. Many would, Kariza replied, her expression unreadable. But here, among the stars, one gains perspective. Yeah, Leo said, his voice quieter. Perspective. The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the soft hum of the ship the only sound. Then Lindholm cleared his throat. You mentioned perspective. What about your people's perspective on Earth? What made you decide we were worth reaching out to? Kariza turned her gaze to the stars. Your species intrigues us. You have a unique potential. And though your history is turbulent, it has shaped you in ways we find fascinating. Fascinating enough to risk flying here, putting your ships on the line, and hoping we don't shoot first? Lindholm pressed. Kariza's glowing eyes shifted to Lindholm. Yes. Leo stepped in, sensing the tension. We appreciate that you've taken this risk, Kariza. But I have to ask, what happens if this partnership doesn't work out? The ambassador's glowing patterns dimmed slightly, a gesture that might have been the Velith equivalent of a frown. Then we would part ways peacefully, and we would continue searching for allies elsewhere. And how would your people feel about that? Leo asked. Coming all this way, only to leave empty-handed? Kariza considered the question carefully. Disappointed, perhaps, but not defeated. We do not come with ultimatums, Dr. Green. Only an offer. Speaking of offers, Lindholm cut in. We still don't have the full picture of what you're after. Rare materials, you said. Care to be more specific? Resources that are scarce in our region of space. Metals, minerals, and certain isotopes that your planet possesses in abundance, Kariza replied. In return, we can provide advancements in technology, medicine, and energy production. And what's stopping you from just taking it? Lindholm asked bluntly. Honor, Kariza said simply. We are not invaders. Lindholm raised an eyebrow. Honor, that's a nice sentiment. But how do we know you won't change your mind? Kariza met his gaze steadily. You have only our word. Lindholm huffed, crossing his arms. Your word doesn't mean much to people who don't know you. Then we will have to show you, Kariza said. Through actions, not just words. The tension in the room eased slightly. Leo nodded, sensing that they'd reached a tentative understanding. All right, Kariza. We'll see what these actions look like. Kariza inclined her head, her bioluminescence brightening just a bit. Thank you, Dr. Green. Major Lindholm. We look forward to proving our intentions. As she turned and left the observation deck, Lindholm leaned closer to Leo. So, what do you think? Are they for real? Leo exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, but I think we owe it to ourselves and to the planet to give them a chance. Lindholm nodded slowly. Fair enough. But if this goes sideways? It won't, Leo said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. We'll make sure it doesn't. The two men stood there, side by side, staring out at the infinite expanse. For now, at least, they were willing to take that first step together. In the weeks following their arrival, the Velith delegation remained on Earth, and a tentative dialogue began to form. Ambassador Kariza's presence became a regular fixture, as did the guarded figure of Major Lindholm, who was rarely more than a few steps away from the talks. Leo found himself drawn into near-constant meetings, with each side trying to gain the upper hand without appearing overly aggressive. Yet, amid the diplomatic maneuvers, small moments of genuine connection began to emerge. It was late one evening when Leo decided to step outside the heavily secured conference compound. He wandered into the garden, needing a moment to clear his mind. The negotiations were proving more taxing than he'd anticipated, full of cryptic promises and carefully worded agreements. For all their talk of mutual benefit, the Velith's true motives remained elusive, and Leo was beginning to wonder if trust was even possible. Couldn't sleep, huh? A voice said from behind. Leo turned to see Lindholm standing in the shadows, his arms crossed. The major was still in uniform, though his jacket was unbuttoned, his usual stoic expression softened by the quiet hour. Not really, Leo admitted. I keep running through the conversations in my head, trying to figure out what I'm missing. They're playing their cards close, Lindholm said, stepping into the faint moonlight. That's what you're missing. Leo gave a short laugh. I'm aware, but what's their game? I mean, they've given us some tech, real tech. But what do they really want? What's their end game? Lindholm shrugged, leaning against a nearby tree. That's what we're supposed to figure out. You, with all your talking, and me by keeping an eye on them. Not that I mind the company, he added with a wry grin. Before Leo could reply, he heard the soft sound of footsteps on the gravel path. Turning, he saw Kariza approaching, her bioluminescent patterns glowing faintly in the darkness. She was dressed in what Leo had come to recognize as casual Velith attire, a flowing tunic-like garment that shimmered subtly as she moved. She inclined her head slightly in greeting. Dr. Green, Major Lindholm, I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, her voice calm and melodic as always. Not at all, Leo said. We were just talking about us, no doubt, Kariza replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. Lindholm didn't bother denying it. Just wondering what makes you tick. Nothing personal. Kariza stepped closer, looking up at the sky. I understand your caution. If the situation were reversed, we would feel the same. Somehow, I doubt that, Lindholm said bluntly. Your people seem more calculated than ours. Kariza turned her glowing gaze toward him. Calculation is not a flaw, Major. It is a survival mechanism. But it does not preclude honesty. And yet, we still don't know exactly what you're after, Leo said, watching her carefully. You say resources partnership, but you haven't fully explained what that means. Kariza studied them for a moment before responding. We seek sustainability. Our region of space is vast, but it has grown barren. We look to you not just for raw materials, but for insight into how you have thrived on a planet with such diversity and complexity. Lindholm raised an eyebrow. Insight, huh? So you're not just after our stuff, you're after our know-how. Precisely, Kariza said, and we are willing to share our own in return. Leo considered this for a moment. But why not just tell us that from the start? Why the secrecy? Trust is not given freely, Kariza said simply. It must be earned. Trust goes both ways, Lindholm countered. Indeed, Kariza replied, meeting his gaze. There was a long silence before Leo finally spoke. We want to believe you, but belief and action aren't the same thing. If you want our trust, you'll have to show us more than words. Kariza inclined her head. I understand. Then allow us to show you. How? Lindholm asked, crossing his arms. By working together, Kariza said, on a project that benefits us both. We have studied your planet and identified a site, an area affected by ecological degradation. Allow us to help restore it, using both our technologies and your methods. It will be a gesture of goodwill, a demonstration that we mean no harm. Leo exchanged a glance with Lindholm. The Major frowned slightly but gave a small nod. Ave to see. As the three of them stood there, the cool night air carrying the faint scent of Earth's flora, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a diplomatic gesture. It was the first step toward something deeper, something that could define their entire relationship with the Velith. Only time would tell if it was a step in the right direction. The restoration project was off to a strong start, at least on paper. On the ground, things were far more complicated. What began as a promising collaboration between Earth scientists and Velith engineers quickly devolved into a logistical nightmare. Cultural misunderstandings, incompatible technologies, and the ever-present suspicion that each side might be withholding critical information all weighed heavily on the project's progress. It wasn't long before tensions began to rise. Why didn't they mention this before we agreed to the plan? Leo asked, his voice tinged with frustration. He stood in the middle of a makeshift command center, a temporary structure set up near the restoration site. Monitors displayed overlapping streams of data, soil composition readings, atmospheric adjustments, and power grid outputs. All of it a tangled mess. Lindholm, leaning against a metal table cluttered with schematics, rubbed his temples. You mean why didn't they tell us their equipment only runs on some weird energy source we don't have? Yeah, I'd like to know that too. Leo sighed and ran a hand through his hair. They're going to say it's a cultural difference, that it's just the way they do things. But I can't shake the feeling they're testing us, seeing how far we'll bend before we break. Probably are, Lindholm said, shrugging. But that doesn't mean we can just throw in the towel. The higher-ups are watching, and you know as well as I do that they want results. Results. Leo snorted. Right? And if we don't deliver, this whole partnership could fall apart. Then we deliver, Lindholm said firmly. But we do it on our terms. Leo gave him a sidelong glance. You sound awfully confident. Not confident, Lindholm replied. Just stubborn. There's a difference. Before Leo could respond, the door to the command center opened, and Kariza stepped in, her bioluminescent markings dimmed. An expression of concern Leo had learned. She glanced between the two men, her calm demeanor seemingly unaffected by the chaos surrounding them. Dr. Green, Major Lindholm, she began, her tone measured. I understand there have been difficulties. That's one way to put it, Lindholm said, crossing his arms. Your team didn't exactly give us the full picture up front. Kariza inclined her head slightly. You are correct. There were details we did not anticipate would be an issue. Details? Lindholm echoed, his voice rising slightly. You're telling me that not having the right power source is a detail? We assumed, Kariza said, maintaining her calm, that our energy matrix would be compatible with your systems. It was an oversight, not an act of deception. An oversight that's brought the project to a standstill, Leo said, his frustration leaking into his voice. I understand your concerns, Kariza said, turning to Leo, and I take full responsibility. I assure you, we are working to resolve the issue as quickly as possible. And what are we supposed to do in the meantime? Lindholm asked, his tone sharp. Sit on our hands? No, Kariza replied. We can adapt. With your permission, I would like to share our energy conversion methods with your engineers. If they can replicate the process, we can move forward without further delay. Leo blinked, caught off guard. You're offering to share your energy technology? Just like that. It is in both our interests to succeed, Kariza said simply. And trust must begin somewhere. Lindholm raised an eyebrow. You're sure about that? You're not worried about us using it against you down the line? Kariza's glowing eyes met Lindholm's. I am not. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then Lindholm pushed off the table and straightened. All right, let's see it. Kariza gave a small nod. I will arrange a demonstration immediately. Your engineers will need only a few adjustments to begin the process. As she turned to leave, Leo called out, Kariza. She stopped and looked back at him. Thank you, he said, for trusting us. Kariza's bioluminescence brightened slightly. Thank you, Dr. Green. I hope we continue to earn that trust. Once she was gone, Lindholm let out a low whistle. Well, that's a first. Sharing tech like that? Either they're desperate or they're serious. Or both, Leo said, still trying to wrap his head around the gesture. But it's a step. A real one. Lindholm grunted in agreement. Guess we'd better make it count. No room for screw-ups now. Right? Leo said, his resolve hardening. Let's get to work. The two men dove back into the mess of data, coordinating with their team and preparing for what could be the breakthrough they desperately needed. They didn't know if this fragile cooperation would hold, but they were determined to give it their best shot. Together, they'd push forward one cautious step at a time. The makeshift energy grid hummed with activity. Leo and Lindholm stood shoulder to shoulder, watching a team of human and Velith engineers argue over the adjustments being made to the alien power converters. Kariza had provided more than just the technology. She had brought in her own experts to walk the Earth team through the process step by step. You seeing this? Lindholm muttered to Leo, nodding toward a heated exchange nearby. They're bickering over which voltage regulator to use. Better that they're arguing over technical details than pointing fingers about sabotage, Leo said, though his brow furrowed. Still, this isn't exactly seamless cooperation. Cooperation doesn't mean everyone has to like each other, Lindholm replied. Just means they gotta get the job done. Leo sighed. Fair enough. I just hoped we'd be past this stage by now. As if on cue, one of the Velith engineers, a wiry figure named Zekith, approached them, his bioluminescent markings flickering erratically, an apparent sign of irritation. Dr. Green, Major Lindholm, perhaps you can assist. Depends on the problem, Lindholm said, crossing his arms. What's going on? The human engineers insist on routing the energy through their traditional transformers before running it through our matrix, Zekith explained. This will create a bottleneck. We must integrate directly with the primary system. Leo frowned. Our engineers have concerns about voltage spikes. They're worried the direct connection could fry the entire grid. Unfounded concerns, Zekith said sharply. We have done this on numerous worlds. Your people's insistence on outdated methods will only cause delays. Lindholm exchanged a glance with Leo. I'll talk to them, Lindholm said, stepping forward. But you're gonna have to be a little more flexible if we're going to get this working. Flexible? Zekith's markings dimmed slightly. This is not a matter of preference. It is a matter of efficiency. Yeah, well, our engineers have to sign off on it, Lindholm said firmly. Let me handle it. Zekith hesitated, then nodded. Very well. I will wait for your decision. As the Velith engineer walked away, Lindholm sighed. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Leo shook his head. Still, I think we're making progress. They're starting to trust us. Not Zekith, Lindholm said with a smirk. He'd rather do the whole thing himself. Leo chuckled, though the weight of the situation still hung heavy. We'll get there. They moved to the other side of the room, where the human engineers were huddled around a schematic. As Lindholm approached, the group straightened slightly, clearly aware of his no-nonsense reputation. What's the hold-up? Lindholm asked, his tone direct but not harsh. One of the lead engineers, a stocky man named Turner, spoke up. We're concerned about the voltage levels. If we connect directly, we run the risk of overloading the main grid. We've seen spikes in their systems before. And you're sure it's not something we can manage? Leo asked, stepping in. Their team insists it's standard procedure for them. Turner frowned. It might be standard for them, but it's not for us. Without proper safeguards, one surge could take down everything we've set up. Lindholm rubbed his chin, weighing the options. All right, what do you need to feel comfortable moving forward? We need to add a secondary regulator, Turner said. Something to absorb any potential surges before they hit the main grid. Sounds reasonable, Leo said, looking to Lindholm. That would slow things down a bit, but it might be worth it if it means we avoid a complete meltdown. Yeah, Lindholm said, nodding. Better safe than sorry. I'll talk to Zekith. Lindholm turned and strode back toward the Velith engineers, leaving Leo with Turner and his team. The two groups had been at odds since the start, but Leo could see the faintest glimmer of understanding forming. Both sides wanted the same thing, a working system. They just had very different ways of getting there. As the day wore on, the arguments subsided, replaced by quiet collaboration. The engineers, human and Velith alike, began speaking in a shared language of numbers and technical jargon. By the time the sun set, the system was finally running at full capacity. You know, Lindholm said as he joined Leo outside the command center, I think this might actually work. Leo leaned against a railing, watching the lights of the restored energy grid flicker to life. We're not out of the woods yet, but it's a good sign. Yeah, Lindholm said. For once, I don't feel like punching someone in the face. Leo laughed. I'll take that as progress. As they stood there, the quiet hum of the restored energy system filled the air. For the first time in weeks, the tension that had plagued their every interaction seemed to fade. The project wasn't perfect, but it was holding together. And for now, that was enough. The energy grid project was officially complete, and Earth's leadership had wasted no time in spinning the achievement as a symbol of cooperation. News channels buzzed with stories of humanity's first major joint effort with an extraterrestrial species, showing carefully selected footage of humans and Velith engineers working side by side. What wasn't shown, of course, were the countless arguments, sleepless nights, and near meltdowns that had threatened to derail the whole thing. Leo stood at the edge of the main conference hall, a glass of water in hand. The event was a formal reception to mark the end of the project and the signing of a preliminary alliance agreement. Diplomats, scientists, and military officers mingled in small groups, their conversations a mix of cautious optimism and careful politicking. Look at all these bigwigs, Lindholm muttered, appearing at Leo's side with a glass of something stronger. You'd think they built the damn grid themselves. Leo smirked. That's diplomacy for you. The people who get their hands dirty rarely get the spotlight. Well, Lindholm said, raising his glass. Here's to getting our hands dirty. They clinked glasses and took a sip. Before Leo could respond, Kariza entered the hall, her flowing, iridescent attire catching the light. The crowd shifted subtly as she walked in, all eyes drawn to the alien ambassador. She spotted Leo and Lindholm almost immediately and made her way toward them. Dr. Green, Major Lindholm, she said with a slight nod. I am pleased to see you here. Wouldn't miss it, Lindholm said, giving her a measured look. After all, we're the reason this party's happening. Kariza inclined her head. Indeed, your efforts were indispensable. This project could not have succeeded without your leadership. Leo couldn't help but smile. Well, it was definitely a team effort. Speaking of which, Kariza said, turning her glowing eyes to Lindholm, I must commend you, Major. Your willingness to adapt and your direct approach made a significant difference. Lindholm raised an eyebrow, then gave a small nod. I appreciate that, and I'll admit, your people pulled their weight. Kariza's lips curved into a faint smile. A high compliment, coming from you. Leo chuckled, feeling a rare moment of levity. So, Kariza, what happens now? We've got the grid running and the alliance agreement signed. What's the next step? The next step, Kariza said, is to build on this foundation. We must continue to collaborate, exchange knowledge, and, she glanced meaningfully at Lindholm, perhaps learn to trust one another. Lindholm leaned against the wall, his expression thoughtful. Trust doesn't come easy, but you've made a decent start. Decent, Kariza repeated, her bioluminescent markings flickering slightly. I will take that as a compliment. Leo grinned. It's probably the best you'll get out of him. Lindholm shrugged. What can I say? I'm a realist. The three of them shared a rare, genuine laugh, brief but enough to ease some of the lingering tension. It was a small moment, but it felt like progress. As the reception carried on, more officials approached Kariza, eager to discuss future projects and potential exchanges. Lindholm excused himself to handle a few security details, leaving Leo and Kariza alone for a moment. Dr. Green, Kariza said quietly, your people have accomplished something remarkable. I'd say it was more of a joint effort, Leo replied. Of course, she said, but I have noticed, you, in particular, have been a steady presence throughout this endeavor. Leo felt a slight heat rise to his face. I just did what needed to be done. And honestly, you and your team didn't make it easy. Kariza's smile widened just enough to be noticeable. Good. Growth seldom comes from ease. Before Leo could respond, Lindholm returned, cutting through the crowd with his usual brisk efficiency. Heads up, Leo, he said. You're being called to the podium. What? Why me? Leo asked, glancing around. You're the guy who kept this thing from falling apart, Lindholm said. Get up there and enjoy the limelight for once. Leo sighed but nodded. As he made his way to the stage, Kariza stepped closer to Lindholm. You care for him, she said, her tone neutral but perceptive. Lindholm raised an eyebrow. He's a good guy. We've been through a lot. I make sure my people are taken care of. And yet, I sense there is more to it, Kariza said, studying him carefully. Lindholm met her gaze evenly. He's a friend. A damn good one. That's all. Understood, Kariza replied, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. On stage, Leo began to speak, his voice steady as he recounted the challenges and triumphs of the project. The audience listened attentively, and even Lindholm allowed himself a small smile of pride. This was more than just a celebration, it was a new chapter. As Leo concluded his speech and the crowd erupted into polite applause, Lindholm leaned toward Kariza. If you really want trust, start by being honest with him. About everything. Kariza regarded him for a moment, then nodded. Perhaps you are right. They watched as Leo stepped down from the podium, greeted by more handshakes and congratulations than he knew what to do with. For a brief moment, it felt like the alliance might truly hold. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like things might actually work. Leo stood on the landing pad at dawn, the faint hum of a Velith shuttle resonating in the crisp morning air. He watched as the sleek craft descended gracefully, its blue energy signature illuminating the early sky. Beside him, Lindholm adjusted his cap, looking up with the skeptical expression he always wore when anything alien was involved. Last day, huh? Lindholm asked. Looks like it, Leo replied, his breath visible in the cool air. Kariza's team wraps up the final inspections today. Then it's all in our hands. Hard to believe we actually pulled it off, Lindholm said. Still feels like the other shoe's about to drop. It always does, Leo said, smirking. But sometimes you just have to trust the work you've done. Lindholm gave a faint grunt of acknowledgement as the shuttle touched down. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, and Kariza stepped out, flanked by 2 of her engineers. She wore her usual flowing attire, but today her glowing patterns seemed a bit dimmer, as if she, too, was reluctant for the collaboration to end. "Dr. Green, Major Lindholm," she said as she approached. "Thank you for meeting us." "Of course," Leo said. "We wanted to see things through." Kariza inclined her head. "It is appreciated. Today marks an important milestone for both our peoples." Lindholm crossed his arms. "That depends on what happens after today." Kariza's gaze shifted to him, calm as ever. "Trust is not built in a single day, Major. It must be maintained." Lindholm nodded but didn't say anything. Leo stepped in to keep the conversation moving. "Let's walk," he said, gesturing toward the edge of the landing pad. The 3 of them moved together, with Kariza's engineers trailing at a respectful distance. The rising sun bathed the landscape in warm light, casting long shadows across the newly restored terrain. "This is the first time I've seen it at dawn," Kariza said softly, looking out over the horizon. "It's something, isn't it?" Leo said. "Hard to believe it was all barren not long ago." "Hard work pays off," Lindholm said, "even if it comes with more headaches than I'd like." Kariza glanced at him. "Your skepticism has served you well, Major. It kept everyone focused." "I just call it like I see it," Lindholm replied. "Doesn't mean I don't want it to work." Leo smiled. "For what it's worth, I think we've all learned a lot. More than we expected." Kariza nodded. "And yet, there is still so much more to learn. This project is but the first step." They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of the restored environment. A gentle breeze, the rustling of leaves, filling the space between them. Then Kariza turned to Leo. "Dr. Green, I wish to thank you personally," she said. "Your efforts were instrumental in bringing our peoples together." Leo rubbed the back of his neck, feeling slightly self-conscious. "I just did what I could. It wasn't exactly smooth sailing." "Few worthwhile endeavors are," Kariza said, her faint smile returning. "But you persevered. That is something worth noting." "Thanks," Leo said, his voice quieter. "But it wasn't just me. Lindholm kept us grounded. And you—" He hesitated, then added, "You gave us a reason to try." Kariza's glowing patterns brightened slightly, a subtle but noticeable shift. "That means more than you know." Lindholm cleared his throat. "Well, before this turns into a whole love fest, we've still got some work to do." Leo laughed. "Fair enough. Let's get to it." They spent the next few hours reviewing the final systems and double-checking the handover procedures. The human engineers worked side by side with their Velith counterparts, the once hostile atmosphere now replaced by mutual respect. Even Lindholm found himself exchanging a few words with Zekith, who had apparently softened his stance after seeing the project through to completion. By midday it was done. The Velith engineers boarded the said, hands on his hips. "That's that." Leo exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I guess it is." They stood there for a while saying nothing. The project was over, but the alliance was just beginning. They had no illusions that the road ahead would be easy, but at least now they had a foundation to build on. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm light over the restored land, Leo and Lindholm turned to face what came next, together.